This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and today I'm on my own. I haven't got a guest with me, and I'm going to do the fourth episode in my colour series, my Kaleidoscope Garden series, and I'm going to do 4 episodes, one on each of the palettes. So just to recap, I work with 4 palettes. Each palette has 6 colours. And today I'm going to talk about the luminous palette. Next week, I'm going to talk about velvet. The week after, comforting. And the week after, and the final week of this mini-series, I will talk about washed. And they each have 6 colours. And just to recap on luminous, the colours are the 3 citrus colours, so orange, lemon yellow, and lime. And then blue, real cobalt blue, dazzling pink into purple. So you know how pink, when it's really bright, almost can look purple in some lights? So that's the 5th colour. And the final colour is scarlet. And so those 6 colours. Now, you'll already know by the fact that just naming those colours, they're really jolly, they're cheerful, they're luminous. That's why they're called luminous. They're lit from within. They're the stained glass colours. I was lucky enough last winter to go to Chartres Cathedral in France, in northern France, and they're incredible blue stained glass, but red and green, all the colours. And as the sun came through, they were radiated out onto the floor of the whole church was just full of this cathedral, incredible light. So these are these colours. Now, what does that create in a garden setting? As I said in a previous episode, you don't want too much of a good thing. And so these are really strong, jolly, saturated colours. There's no white in them at all. They're really strong. And they can get a little restless. And so what I would say is be a bit strict, and I would say go for 2 or maximum 3 in this palette and work with them in the bridesmaid, gatecrasher recipe that I gave in the previous episode, in episode 3. But I'll go through it again in this episode if you don't want to catch up. So those are the 6 colours. And the other thing that's really important, if you want this palette as the dominant palette in your garden, because you want it to be uplifting, you want it to be cheery, you want it to be saturated and joyful, just be quite strict that each area, each visual field just has these 2 or maximum 3 colours, but you can use another 2 or 3 from the same palette around the corner, but it will then tie together in a brilliant way in that it's a cheery, lovely garden. Okay, and so what are the families that I think you kind of want to concentrate that are guaranteed to give you this colour, this palette rather? And I would say that there are quite a few. And so the first, of course, is euphorbias, are euphorbias. So the euphorbia family are acid green. Most of them, not all. Some of them are orange. And actually euphorbia griffithii or fireglow is orange, but they both work. Both the oranges and the acid greens work brilliantly in this palette. So euphorbia is a real mainstay as the foliage backdrop. And if you like euphorbias, you're going to like this palette. The second family are tulips, and these are the really bright, saturated, wonderful pinks, oranges, scarlets, yellows, etc. So tulips are fantastic. Of course, because you've got this really radiant, luminous purple, you've got alliums. So alliums are another really good family for you. Lupins, these are the flamboyant flowers, aren't they? These are the sort of almost like the peacocks or the parrots of a garden. And so lupins I would consider there. So you might be surprised to hear that sweet peas I also use a lot in this palette, because there are actually lots of really wonderful blues, like Blue Velvet is a fantastic bluey purple. I really love King Edward VII, which is a really lovely saturated pink. So, lots of sweet peas. Machacana, of course, is purple and is the most highly scented sweet pea in the world. So sweet peas would be my number 5 family for this palette. Zinnias. So just brilliant for really fantastic, bold, sweet, jolly colours. You can't go wrong with zinnias. Gladioli, the Grandiflora gladiolus, absolutely wonderful. I mean, again, like sort of paradise birds, they're just so flamboyant. You couldn't do without dahlias. So that would be number 8. And then number 9, you've got to include some salvias, partly for that cobalt blue, but also for the long season. And that's the other thing that I really stressed in the last episode, is the thing about succession, is that to get this palette working really hard for you from March and April, the first 2 blocks of the year, to September and October, the last 2 blocks of the really colourful year, then salvias will help you out massively. So let's just then break it down to the different colours. So let's start with orange. So which are real mainstay plants that I recommend you jot down and you think about using if you're going to go for this palette? Orange is a totally core colour here, and I know lots of people feel wary of orange, but I think it's a just garden transforming colour. So for March and April, I would think of the imperial fritillaries. Do you know those whopping great ones that get to like 1.5 meters? And they are brilliant because they give you that scale and stature very early in the year. So I would say the imperial fritillaries, Fritillaria imperialis, is a complete mainstay. And do you know what? Why not mix that with the purple honesty, Lunaria annua? And there you've got a brilliant combination already. So purple and orange. Couldn't be better. Or you could move to purple and orange with tulips, and you could go for ballerina tulip and perhaps something like Negrita parrot tulip, which we find really, really brilliant here. Very long flowering variety. So that would give you purple and orange again. And even you could go to a lupin like terracotta and mix it with perhaps another variety that is in the carmine to sort of purpley tone of beefeater. And that would give you it again. And then orange and purple, yet again, I would go for a crocosmia like Lucifer for August with a phlox like Blue Paradise. And that will give you this same wonderful colour combo. And then dahlias, maybe something like American Girl or Epelale, which is one of our favourite orange tulips here, with the classic purple dahlia called Thomas E. Edison. That would give you wonderful, wonderful orange. And I haven't, talked about perhaps orange with yellow, but orange and yellow can be really joyful. And of course, the Welsh poppy, which self-seeds all through here, and yellow often comes right next to orange. And that's wonderful. But also we create that look with Iceland poppies, Papaver nordicale. And we actually sow those 2 or 3 times in the year so we can get that yellow and orange combination. Anyway, so orange, really important in the garden here, and we use tons and tons of it as a highlight. And it's one of those things, you don't want too much perhaps of it, but a sprinkling of orange through a garden really brings it to life. I couldn't more recommend it. And I would say the same of scarlet. And I talked about this actually as one of the colours that are thought of to be tricky. In episode 2, I included orange and yellow in that as well, actually. But I think scarlet, we use it here on what's called the green stage, which is the balcony outside the Oast House, so up on the first floor. And it is perfect for there because it draws the eye to a place that otherwise would be quite dull. And so that's what I find scarlet, or, really, really bright, bright reds are so good for. And we use the Rococo tulip for that. And I love it. And I love Go-Go Red, which is another really splendid red tulip. And then I'm also really keen on a whopping great red tulip called Queen's Day. And that's actually been coming up in the garden in the same shady-ish east-facing bed here. So it gets light for a bit through the day, but not all day at all. And Queen's Day's been coming back here for 10 or 12 years in the same spot. So it's very, very perennial. So good scarlet for spring. And then a good scarlet into sort of slightly more terracotta-y is the absolutely stupendously brilliant rose called Cinco de Mayo. And it flowers from May until November, but it's bright. I remember giving 3 bare root plants to a great friend of mine in London, and she sort of trusted my taste, so she put them into her garden. And then the 4th time, her husband said to her, "Are you sure about that red rose that Sarah gave you?" Because the other palette, the sort of general palette in their garden was quite quiet. And so this very shouty rose really looked out of place. And that's the thing, red is shouty. You've got to be aware of that. And so having it in the right spot, we have it as you walk down the steps from the Dutch yard into the Oast garden. So it's on the cusp of the dark, rich, velvety palette into the boiled sweet palette. And it works unbelievably well there. It looks beautiful against the red brick walls. So, reds are good, but Cinco de Mayo is a splendid, splendid rose. And I already mentioned a sweet pea. And King Edward VII is just lovely. I like Windsor too. That's another red. And then obviously penstemons and salvias. So there are lots of penstemons in that sort of nice, bright red. Red garnet is a good one. And I mix those with lots of red salvias. A really good one is Jezebel. Another really good one in red with a bit of white, which is more difficult, I think, is Hot Lips. So if you possibly can go for the single colour reds, I think they're even better. And Royal Bumble is another red we grow lots and lots of here. And just remember that tip, that if you want to grow roses and you want them to be black spot and mildew free, underplanting them with these small leaved salvias, both Jezebel and Royal Bumble are a microphylla or Gemensis hybrid salvia, and so they will protect your rose against fungal diseases because they have sulfur in their leaves, which when they heat up, they sort of give off if you have them planted underneath the rose and make a very dilute sort of sulfur atmosphere in which the rose is bathed, and it keeps them absolutely pristine. So that would be scarlet through the year. And then moving on to pinks into purples. Well, as I already mentioned, obviously alliums are the mainstay, aren't they, for, May into June, even into July. But there are some wonderful purple tulips too, and pink. I love Mariette, which is absolutely the right sort of pink, very, very, very bright pink. And I love Purple Heart, which is the bluer shade of purple, but beautiful, beautiful tulip. And the Lunarias, so the Purple Honesty, couldn't be better. And so with those into the alliums, you've got kind of March, April, May and June covered for purple. And then I would move on to the verbenas, of course, Verbena bonariensis and Verbena rigida. And you know what? As I'm sitting here and we're getting into spring, Adam said to me this morning when we were having breakfast, have you noticed that those verbena seed heads are still being fed on by the blue tits outside our kitchen window? So they've still got enough seed in them, the Verbena bonariensis, to be feeding the birds. And that is just such a thing to notice and to remember, that verbenas hold on to their seed really late in the year. But in the colour kind of sphere, they're fantastic for purple. From kind of July until November time here, Verbena rigida down at ground level, Verbena bonariensis standing tall. And then finally, salvias for the purples and pinks. So I love lots of them, but Lake Omega is a really good, nice bluey into purple. And then the really fantastic small leafed one called Serapetosi, found by Jamie Compton in South America. On to blues. For the luminous palette, you've got to go for you've got to go salvias, but starting the year probably with hyacinths And I adore Anastasia, which is the most simple. Looks like a glorified bluebell. And then we move on here to Aquilegias like Blue Barlow. Will give us lovely blues through May into June. And then really you start on salvias and echiums. So for June into July, Salvia viridis blue and Echinum vulgare, moving on to any of the salvias you want pretty much. So whether it's Amistad or whether it's Black and Bloom or whether it's, the second sowing of Salvia viridis blue. There are just so many wonderful radiant blues that you can go for, but salvias really are fabulous for that. You can go delphiniums, which are really popular, but just remember that they only flower for about 3 weeks. You can cut them down, including the foliage, and they'll flower again in August. But they're pretty brief, whereas salvias will give you blue flowers right the way through for a good 5-month stretch. And then we've already mentioned the acid greens. And so then finally the yellows. Again, it's got to be poppies, I think. But of course, it's got to be narcissus for the March-April season. And I love so many of them. On the whole, if they're really bright yellow, I like the smaller flowered ones. So things like Cocopelli and Cordobensis, which are almost like species, or tete-a-tete, the classic tete-a-tete, which you see in parks all around the UK. And then onto tulips. I love Green Mile and Flaming Parrot. And then perhaps onto Achilles, like Gold Plate, that will give you golden, lemon yellow to gold flowers right the way through June, July and August. And then sunflowers, of course, Helianthus. We have a perennial one here called Lemon Queen, and I adore that. And then maybe a dahlia. And yellow dahlias are my least favourite, but Florinor is a good one and gives you a nice balance of not too yellow, quite a sort of calm yellow. And then finally, you would end the year with Rebecchias. So we've got the acid greens, and we started with euphorbias, but it's not just, you've got to keep going. And so you've got things like Viburnum opulosterile, the Gelder rose. You've got petunias in green, Sophisticata, lime green. You've got zinnias like Benari's giant lime. And you've got Nicotiana lime green, the green-flowered tobacco. And then finally, of course, there aren't any green dahlias, but there are green chrysanths. Things like Shamrock is a good green one. And of course, there are ferns and other euphorbias. So late flowering euphorbia is Ceratocarpa. So 6 colours. You've got acid green that we just finished with. You've got orange. You've got yellow. So the 3 citrus colours. You've got red. You've got pink into purple. And you've got blue. And with that selection of plants I've given you a sort of outline of, it should give you a succession, thinking of your months, just so that you've got your black and white drawing of your garden, you've decided on the luminous palette, you're putting a sheet of tracing paper over your black and white drawing, and you're putting on your favourite plants for March and April. You've got another sheet of tracing paper, May and June, another sheet of tracing paper, July and August, and the final sheet, September, October. What's going to be the main colour baton holders for each of those 2-month chunks? And have you got the right balance with lovely highlighting colour that isn't too much where it gets manic, but you've got your bridesmaid, gatecrasher, so you've got your orange tulips, say, your orange wallflowers, say, and your purple tulips, say, in your first couple of months. And then let's move on to the May-June pairing. So there you may want to go for a lupin, perhaps underplanted again with a wallflower, and then perhaps a purple honesty. And that will go on flowering through, well, seed pods will start to form in June. And then for July and August, you might want to go for a purple dahlia, say, a purple verbena to go with it, and underplant it with an orange dahlia, a more compact orange dahlia, or perhaps a bright pink dahlia, But for an orange dahlia in that sort of setting, I might go something like Happy Halloween. And then for the final 2 months, I would definitely go 2 blue salvias. So something tall like Amistad, a bit smaller like Lake Omega. And maybe as a gatecrasher there, I would go for a wonderful bright pink Nerine. So your sheet of paper, tracing paper over it, bridesmaid, gatecrasher, taking you through each 2-month blocks of the year. And that way you can have your luminous palette and enjoy it, and it will be really fantastic and life enhancing and cheer you up whenever you walk into the garden. Thanks very much for listening to Grow Cookie to Range, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, talking about the luminous palette. Next week, we're going to break it up a bit, actually, and we're going to return to the colour series after a 1-week break. Oh, actually, 2-week break. Because next week, I'm joined by Millie Proust, who has become a friend, who's a flower grower and florist. And she has written the most wonderful new book that takes me back to when we first arrived here at Perch Hill, which is for beginner gardeners, called How Does Your Garden Grow? And it's a really heartfelt story of making her garden. And actually, it's based on emails. I mean, this was the genesis of the book that she was sending to her sister, who didn't know anything about gardening. And Millie had been gardening for 12 to 15 years when she started the book. And I just found it a completely engaging and useful description of how to make a garden, or how to improve your garden, or how to just get out there as a completely non-green fingered beginner. And Millie holds your hands in a really fantastic way to create beauty, but also in a practical way. And so I couldn't more recommend it. And that's why I'm going to do a whole episode with Millie on her new book. So see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.